So you want to tune your mototec or any other kind of electric bike. You want to get a Fardriver, or maybe you already have one. Now what? Well, today we're going to go over just that. We're going to play a hypothetical that I just bought this Fardriver ND72-300, wired it, and put it in the bike, but nothing else. And I'm not going to go over how to wire it because I've already done that in a previous video of mine, and this video is going to be long enough as it is. Now it's disclaimer time because I know this subject is going to prompt a lot of questions in the comments. This setup and tune is specifically going to be for my mototec 60V Pro with a stock battery and a stock motor, and this might not apply 100% to you and your bike, even if you have a 60V as well. Also, this process is intended for a beginner, and quite frankly, I'm a beginner when it comes to this, so some of my settings and some of my explanations might not be correct. Feel free to tell me that I'm wrong in the comments. In fact, if you know a lot more than I do, then make a video on it. I'll watch it. And finally, tune at your own risk. If you do something and end up frying your controller, don't come crying to me. But let's do this. However, before we even get started, there is a few things that you need to set up in advance before you even turn the key on this thing. First thing is your battery. Make sure that whatever battery you have plugged into your bike is fully charged. So beforehand, if you have to, plug it in overnight, do whatever you have to do, make sure that that voltage is as high as it possibly can so that the Autolearn process knows exactly what kind of voltage it's going to be working with. Second thing, and also to do with the Autolearn process, is to make sure that your bike is set up in such a way that you can go wide open throttle and it's not going to go running away from you. In my case, as you can see here, I have it on the center stand, and yes, it is still connected to the motor. The chain is still there. It's going to spin this rear wheel, and that's fine. Some people will argue that the chain has to be taken off so that the motor is as free spinning as possible for the Autolearn process, but in our case with the 60V, it's on a little differential. It's got a gear reduction, so it's actually going to be connected to something anyway, and I've done the Autolearn process multiple times on my 48V with and without the chain, and I saw no differences whatsoever in either of those processes. It's fine. And third, of course, is to make sure that you have the Fardriver app connected to your phone or iPad or whatever device you're going to be using to actually do the tuning. For you iPhone users, it's actually pretty simple. You can just go to the App Store and look up Fardriver and you'll find it in there. For us Android users, it's not so simple. That's not on the Google Play Store. We actually have to go to Fardriver's website and download it manually. I will put a link to it in the description down below so you can find it pretty easily. But now we can actually get into the process. I'm going to turn on the Fardriver app. So I'm going to put my screen on the side here so you see exactly what I see, and what you see is probably not going to be this when you open up the Fardriver app straight away. It's probably going to ask you for either a phone number or an email address so that you can create an account. Make sure that you follow that process first, and then you'll get to this home screen. But in this home screen, this is the main page with parameters. There's a few other things like the graph, and that's in the Autolearn process. We'll show you that a little bit later on. There's a VCU, I don't know what that is. There's a curve, which is more like of an active tracking thing. I don't use that either. But then we come to communications, and this is the important place because this is where we're going to actually connect to this Fardriver. So make sure you have your Bluetooth on, and we're actually going to turn on the bike for the first time now, and it's going to show up on the phone. Now, as you saw, mine connected automatically, again, because I've used this before, but you're gonna have to manually select it. It's gonna say you on Q, FOC, some numbers, and you're gonna be able to select that. It'll ask to pair or ask to bound to it, and then you would be able to connect to it. Now, I guess we can kind of talk about the beeping, and I'm gonna turn it off a little bit so it's not beeping over me while I tell you, but the beeps that you were hearing was for the Autolearn process. Beep, 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 beep. That's what it means when it says it's ready for Autolearn, and you can start that process right away, and then it kind of knows and has at least some kind of basic tune, and then it would be ready to go. However, again, you might be getting a different series of beeps. For example, that is a series of error beeps. Now, in the manual, which I also will link in the description down below, it'll have a list of what type of beeps or what number of beeps and what error that is. In my case, this is 5 beeps, and 5 beeps is an over voltage error. What I did was I made this think that it's connected to a 48V bike, but this is a 60V battery. And so 60 volts being more than 48, what it expects, it thinks it's over volted. But that leads us right into some of the parameters that you're going to have to set before you even do the Autolearn process. And one of those first things is rated voltage. You need to tell it what type of battery this is connected to. So we're gonna click rated voltage, and as you can see, there are several options, and in my case, this is a 60V bike, so I'm gonna select 60 volts. It's still beeping, but that's because I hadn't hit save yet, so 2 short beeps is a confirmation. But now we get the series of beeps that we saw earlier, which is I'm ready for Autolearn. Now besides voltage, there is a couple more things that you need to set up before Autolearn, because as much as this thing will learn by doing Autolearn, there are a few things that the Fardriver just simply won't know that you need to tell it. So we're gonna open the Pro NBLE, which is Pro Enable is what I refer to it as. This is kind of like the detailed parameter section. And here under parameters, there are gonna be a few things that we wanna be able to tell it. First thing is the temp sensor. I know for a fact that this motor does not have one, so we got to tell it that there is none. You want to make sure that you pick the right one so that it knows that it's in a right temperature range, basically. But in my case, I don't have one at all, so I'm going to select none. Then the second thing is pole pairs. Pole pairs is telling it how many magnets are in the motor. Now for mototecs, it's known that this is 5 pole pairs, meaning that it has 10 total magnets, but it lists it in pairs, so half of that 5. The default on here is 4. Again, there's several options that you can choose. We're gonna select 5 and also make sure to hit save and confirm. So with those few things actually set, now we're ready to actually do the Autolearn. So we're gonna go back and then go to graph, where it shows you a series of dials, and then right in the middle there it says Autolearn. So this is where we're gonna do that. Now what we do for Autolearn is we're gonna hold this thing wide open and keep it there. Now this is gonna ramp up. It's gonna spin for quite a while. It's probably gonna slow down, and then it's gonna spin in the other direction, ramp up, and then ramp down. It's gonna do a few things, but just make sure whatever you do, keep that 100% wide open throttle, because it needs to know what wide open throttle is, and you're telling it by holding it open like that. And we'll hold it until it beeps at us, and then we can let off, and then it will be done. I'll show you. Full throttle. Looks like it's spinning in reverse. Ramp down. Now it's going forward. Ramping down. Gave us the 2 beeps. We can let off. Throttle error. Ah, there we go. I have actually seen that a few times where we'll give it a throttle error at the end of the Autolearn process, but give it a second. If it has a red X in the middle there, it will eventually give you a green check mark. If it doesn't, you can always hit this Autolearn button down here and then confirm by hitting enter, and you can just do it over again. But that's the first step. We've gotten this thing to Autolearn, and it would actually be ready and rideable as it is right now. We could also turn it off and then turn it back on. It'll give the 2 beeps to say that it's on, but then it's ready to roll. But now comes the fun part, tuning. So to get into the tuning, we're gonna go to parameters and back to that Pro NBLE section. This is where everything is going to be tuned and adjusted to our liking. Now I'm gonna go through this and just scroll basically all the way down. As I go through it, I'm gonna make my settings, and that's not necessarily your settings, but just what I feel like I want to work with, and I will probably tweak these myself as well, and I'll also go over what these settings are in general. So we're in parameters right here. Angle detect, now that is something that the Autolearn does. It's just detecting what type of motor it is, and for us, it's a 0 to 120 degree Hall sensor, Hall motor, and so that's perfectly fine, don't touch it. Temperature sensor, we already did that. Phase offset is also something that the Autolearn process will do. Your phase offset could be anywhere from 0 up to 360. It put 279 in my case. It might be different for you, but that's something that you don't necessarily need to change. And if you do, only change it by like 1 or 2 numbers. You can't really go any more than that. Pole pairs, again, we've already done that. Motor direction, this one is very important because 1 means backwards, 0 means forwards. And this is actually showing in 1, which means if I hit the throttle here, slowly, yep, it's actually spinning backwards. So I'm gonna tap that, and instead of 1, we're going to do 0. Yep. Now it's going forward the way we want it to. Rated speed is what it determines that the RPM of this motor is capable of. That's something that the Autolearn process does. Don't mess with it. Rated voltage, we told it that earlier. Rated power is something that you enter in, and it's also kind of variant on the rated voltage. In general, this is a 2000 watt bike, so it's 2000 watt rated power. I'm gonna leave it. Now max speed, this has a much higher RPM than the rated. Basically, we don't want this to run away with RPM because then that would damage the motor. We want it to be give or take like no more than 50% over. So for that, I think I'm going to change that to, let's say, 10,000 RPM. Max speed is where field weakening comes into play, and we'll see that later on. Back speed is if you have a backwards button, like if you have a reverse gear, this will limit the RPM for that. Actually, I've heard that that's a little too high, so people will back that down to 100, but it doesn't really matter in this case because I don't have a reverse gear. That's actually with a lot of these settings, you'll find that they just simply don't apply, at least to this specific bike. Next one are the fun ones, max line current and max phase current. So that is telling it how many amps to push through the controller, and in general, the higher it is, the more power you get, but there is a point. Because even though this controller, at least in my case specifically, will have a max of 100 amps for line and 300 for phase, that might not necessarily be the limitations that you're dealing with. It might also be limited to your battery, how much it will be able to discharge, and it might be limited by your motor to how much it will receive. And finding this information is actually really difficult on this battery and this motor. I looked and looked and looked, and I cannot find exactly what it has as a rated max line current. But in my case, I'm going to go on the safe side and cut this in half and say 50 amps. I've run 50 amps on this thing, extended were multiple charge cycles, and it seems to be taking it perfectly fine. I think you could also maybe up this to something like 80, 85. I think it would be safe-ish, but of course, you know, it's the higher you go, the more at risk the other components like the battery and the motor are. Now, phase current. I think it is that the line current is basically the current that's going from one phase, and then since this is a three-phase motor, the phase current is the total current of the system. Again, I could be explaining that really badly. All that to say is that the phase in general should be 2.5 to 3 times that of your line current. So because I'm putting this at 50 amps, I'm going to set my max phase to 150. Throttle response, this is how twitchy or how consistent or how linear you want your throttle response to be. There's a sport mode, an eco mode, and then line. I've just been keeping mine in line. It's perfectly fine. Throttle accelerator step. This has a default number of 128, and I think the range of this is somewhere from like 8 to 224. I know 224 is the max. And this is saying, how responsive do you want the accelerator to be? I like to have as quick of a response as possible with this. So I'm gonna actually put it not necessarily at 224, but I think I'm gonna keep mine around the 200 mark. It's not so instant that it'll run away from you, but it's still quick and over that kind of default where it might have some bit of a lag to it. Boost line current and boost phase. I'm just gonna keep this at the maximum of the controller, which is 100 and 300. This doesn't necessarily apply to this case because I don't have a boost button. Phase exchange is if you switch the wires. There's those 3 colored wires that come from the motor. There's a yellow, a green, and a blue one. If you have it miswired and it's acting funky, rather than actually disconnecting and swapping those wires physically, you can do so just in the app here. ECO acceleration coefficient, I have no idea what that number is. The default's to 8. I'm gonna keep it at 8. Weak character, this is where your field weakening comes into play. It sounds like if it's weak, it's not gonna be as fast, but actually field weakening makes you faster. So it defaults to 0 or fast, and I'm gonna keep it that way. Weak response, so this is how responsive your field weakening is going to be. 0 is the highest, and then 7 is the lowest or none. It defaults to 0. I'm gonna leave it at 0. Throttle decelerator step. So this is the opposite of throttle accelerator step that we did earlier. This also has the same range up to 224, and what this is doing is rather than when you hold on the throttle, it's when you let off. In this case, I actually want it to be the full 224 because I don't want any kind of lag whatsoever. Throttle low and throttle high. Now this, the Autolearn process learns itself, and this is the voltage that's going to your throttle, and the throttle will take anywhere from, I think, 1 to 5 volts. In general, this should be okay as is, although I'm going to shave off just a little bit. 3.8 I think is fine. Anything over 4, I would be worried and I would actually change that down. But for the throttle low, I'm actually gonna go a little bit lower than that. I'm gonna say 0.95. Ratios and speed. So this is where your field weakening and your rated speed or your RPM comes into play. Some people will have these set 100% all the time. but that's not recommended because even though you're putting 100%, that doesn't mean that you're going to have this running at 100%. You don't necessarily want that in the higher range. I'm gonna reference the rated speed here, which was give or take 6,500 RPM. I think I'm going to have 100% up until like the 6,000 mark. And from there, I wanna taper it back pretty significantly. 6,500, I'm gonna say, let's do 50%, and then we'll maybe go down like 10% increments from there, and we'll leave 9,000 at 0%. So LD is something I think that the Autolearn also sets up. I did not mess with that, so I'm just gonna leave it. LQ is also something that the Autolearn set up. Now, I actually know LQ has to do with your mid throttle, how much voltage that the middle of the range will give. I'm gonna keep it at 329, but if I sense that the throttle has a bit of a dead spot as I go from 0 through quarter to half throttle, if it feels like it's not giving me enough, then I can up this to maybe something like 1,000, which would give me 1 volt, something like that. Now we get down to ratios in gear. This is only going to apply if you decide to keep your 3-speed position switch. Maybe you have one up on the side here with a toggle, or you keep the old stock one where it has a dial with 3 different positions. So what this is doing is it's gonna take a percentage of what you put up earlier with the max line and phase current and limit speed as well. And this is totally up to you. I'm going to make my low speed 25% across the board. And then for mid speed, I'm going to do, let's do 75% for these. Energy regen. So this is where you can actually program regenerative braking on your motor and actually have the current reverse, and that would actually feed back into the battery, which is really cool. It says stop back current and max back current. What that means is that it's showing how much amperage is pushing back into the battery. This defaults to 2 amps and 4 amps, and I suggest you leave it there. You wanna make sure that it's at basically the same rated amperage that your charger is. Actually, if we wanna see for certain, on this one, the battery charger has an input of 2.5 amps. Between that 2 and 4, we're right there. Then there are another series of RPMs and percentages. In this case, it's 0, and it goes from 0 down to -100. The default is 0, meaning no regenerative braking whatsoever. And if you go up to 100, that means it's giving you the maximum regen. I'm going to focus on that in another video, but for now, I'm just gonna leave it as is. I'm not gonna do regenerative braking for this bike right now. Then we get to functions. This section, a lot of this is not going to apply whatsoever. With this bike, it is as bare bones as possible. So there are really a lot of things that this Fardriver is capable of, but just simply doesn't need to be done on such a simple bike. The only inputs to this thing really is the throttle and maybe the brake, and that's it. So for example, boost pin, that's if you have a boost button, so you get that boost current. I don't have that, so it's invalid. Cruise pin, that's for cruise control. It sets a default, but really I don't have one, so it doesn't apply. Side stand pin, that's if there's a warning for your kickstand, like it won't move if the kickstand is down, a kickstand switch, but again, invalid. Then there's forward pin and backward pin. Again, that's if you have gears in this thing or like a reverse button, but again, doesn't apply. High speed and low speed pin actually do apply in this case because we have the 3-speed switch. High speed is 2 pin 3 and low speed is 1 pin 2, and that's what it senses. But if you have it miswired, you can switch these. So for example, if you're riding around and you switch this down and it actually increases, then maybe you need to get those flipped, those pins. You can do that right here. Anti-theft, if you have an alarm system on here, that's where that pin is located, but again, does not apply. Switch voltage pin, which I think is if you have 2 different batteries with 2 different voltages connected to the Fardriver, you can put in a switch to flip between the 2, but again, it does not apply. Are you sensing a theme? Honestly, for the rest of this, I should just show you what actually does apply to this bike, and one of those is the very last one in this function section, which is called follow. Follow actually turns on or off your energy regen, and this has a couple of different settings, and it depends on how you have that wired into your Fardriver. But for now, we're gonna keep it in number 1, which is disabled, so it's not gonna be doing any regenerative braking for now. Then we get to the display section, which, surprise, surprise, does not apply to this bike. This only applies if you have an actual display. This is where you would set that up and kind of get things fine-tuned so that it has things like the proper speedo, the proper RPM, all of that good stuff. So again, I'm not getting into that with this one, does not apply. Protect. This has a couple of sections here learned from the Autolearn process, and in part you could be entering yourself as well. Over voltage protection and low voltage protection. So what it's giving there is a range of the voltage, telling it how high and how low it can get before the Fardriver will sense anything wrong and shut off. The only thing really that we can change here is low volt protect. And right now it's sensing 60.5 volts, which is way too high because the discharge on this, and I'll also put a link down there, the lowest voltage that a 60 volt battery can get to, where it's quote 0%, is 48 volts. So I'm actually going to set this to just a hair over that. I'm going to say 48.1. Motor temperature, controller temperature, all of that is set in stone. Don't touch it. Battery coefficient, I don't know. I don't mess with that. That's pretty much all you need to know with the Protect. Everything else in here is set in stone from the Autolearn process, and I have not touched it all, and honestly don't really plan to. PID parameters is something that could be tweaked, but this is a very complicated section, at least for me and my understanding, and it's one of those that if you get it wrong, you will damage something. It has things like start, mid, and max KI on one side and then KP on the other. And those numbers have to be in sync with each other. And there is a chart, you can look at that section, but you have to have specific numbers in here. I'm just going to keep it as is for now. If I really think I need to make that change, then I will delve into that a little bit later. Then the product section, again, this is a lot of the things that don't apply with this. A lot of these correspond to the display and also correspond to all the functions, all the pins that we had that were invalid up there, all of those different settings that you could have, but in this case we don't, so we don't even need to look at it. And after all that, we've gotten down to the very bottom of our parameters, and now we can say that we have tuned this, or at least got it at a good starting point. So most importantly, we're gonna hit save and save. So now this is more or less ready to go, and not necessarily 100% tuned, but enough that we can jump on the bike and give it a ride and see how it feels.
And off the bat, it feels pretty good. So now's the time where you just kind of ride it around and see how it feels, honestly. Like slowing down here and just using initial throttle from nothing to like 8th throttle, quarter throttle, because that's very important. You want to make sure that that's nice and smooth and that you can handle it at slow speeds, one-handed like this. Then you want to go up in the throttle and through the range, see how it is at all different speeds. Like right off the bat right now, I can feel I'm at full throttle, but I can feel like it is limited. So I think what that means for me anyway is to adjust those ratios and speed and change those percentages a little bit. I think I might have it a little bit too low on the high end so that I'm actually limiting myself right now. You want to test anything you can think of, really. Just like go ahead and do a top speed run, see what your highest mile an hour is, give it a whack of the throttle at any speed that you're currently at to see kind of how the throttle response is as you're going through different speeds, and then just feel it out. That's all you really need to do at this point. It's purely on feeling and your personal preferences.
So it's been set up, it's been tuned, and it's been tested. Now we would just need to make the tweaks based on how it feels or how we wish the current tune would be different. Then take it out again, test it, tweak it, wash, rinse, repeat. This is where you take it over yourself, because one person's perfect tune is not necessarily yours. You can also reach out to others for help if you're looking for a specific feel, or like when I was tuning my 48 volt, you come across some serious issues that need fixing. But for this, don't come to me. I'm not the expert, I'm just a YouTuber that happens to throw stuff online. But there are some Facebook groups and other forums that have members there that will help you out. In fact, there's even members of those groups and forums where they offer tuning services, so you can just throw them a few bucks and they'll give you a custom tune. I'll link a few of those resources in the description below. Now get to tuning.